Hello, hello. Welcome to One Wild World, a podcast by The Echo. I'm your host, Matthew Juneau.
And I'm the editor, Mike Davis.
Today, we have a great episode for you. Much of our background has been focused on wildlife, but today, to kick off the podcast, we're going to step outside of that realm.
I think it's something that will be a strength of the podcast, being able to not only cover wildlife, but all animals, from pets to working animals, and again, back to wildlife.
Yeah, in fact, it was a very intentional decision for us to include not just wildlife, which is a focus of both of our backgrounds, but to include every type of animal because we can be a voice for all of the different work that is being done.
Yeah, and I think that's going to allow us to be accessible to an even broader audience as well. Not everyone is super duper interested in wildlife. Some people have way more experience with pets or working animals. So I think it's really going to allow us to reach the largest amount of people that way.
Exactly. And what excites me about today's episode and talking about the agricultural world is I think a lot of people have interactions almost on a daily basis with that world, whether it's the food that they're eating. Sometimes a lot of the clothes that we're wearing comes from that. But I know when I go to the grocery store, there's a little bit of a disconnect when I'm looking at ground beef. I don't always think about, oh, well, that came from a cow. I'm just looking at the different prices and the different types of cuts of meat. And I think that's something that's really interesting to explore in this conversation.
Yeah, totally. And for me, having an ecology background, it's really valuable to look at things that way because you're seeing the entire ecosystem and the effects of every single kind of stakeholder in that ecosystem, and also the very tangible products that can be derived from all of those different stakeholders. So it's just a really valuable way to broaden your perspective.
And not only just broaden that perspective, but learn about all of the great ways that farmers are producing this livestock and raising them and treating them in ethical ways is something that I think is worth supporting in the future.
Yeah, I think it's really easy to become pessimistic about the agricultural industry because there's so much out there about animal cruelty and bad practices within the agricultural industry. But really, we're just trying to highlight the good work that's being done, and there is a lot of good work being done. So luckily, we have a lot of material to draw from in that sense.
Exactly. Now, before we hear from our guest, every episode of One Wild World is going to start with a game called
What's That Animal?
I've prepared an audio clip of an animal making a sound, and I want the listeners to see if they can figure it out. This game's something that was inspired from watching Pokemon as a kid, and if you weren't a fan of the show, I can explain that game now. Basically, they'd put up silhouettes of characters from the show to see if you can figure out which character it was. Now, to make it our own, I'm going to play the sound of an animal a couple of times and talk briefly about it and see if you can be an animal detective and figure it out. So, here we go. I'll play the sound now. Now look, this might not be the hardest animal to guess, but here's a little bonus question if you think you already know the animal. I want you to think of what the animal might be doing while it's making this sound. So with that in mind, here's the sound one more time. Ooh, quite the mystery for all of you. A theme that's going to follow throughout the whole season is that the animal featured is going to be related to our guest and the type of work they do. The answer will be revealed at the end of the episode after we get a bit more context into the world the animal lives in. I truly can't think of a better person to give us that context than Amy McFarland. Amy is an instructor and chair of the Agricultural Sciences and Technology program at Ames Community College in Fort Lupton, Colorado, teaching many agricultural courses, including animal science and agribusiness. She also serves as the club advisor to the Ames Agricultural Club. Now, our conversation with Amy McFarland. How long have you been teaching at Ames?
I've been at Ames this is my 6th year. I'm just finishing up, and then my 5th year as the department chair of agricultural sciences.
Wow. So you've been there for a little bit.
A little bit, yes. I've been there for 6 years. And then prior to that, I was actually an extension agent in Adams County, Colorado, and I worked with the 4-H program there.
Nice. For guests that might not know, can you describe what 4-H is? Because I know it's a huge thing that gets a lot of young people into the agricultural world and into animal sciences, and it could be an opportunity for people listening.
Yes, absolutely. So 4-H, first and foremost, is a youth development organization. It's for children ages 5 all the way to 18. And the primary role of the 4-H program is to teach youth skills that they can use for their entire life. So things like respect, responsibility, time management, all of those different, very, very valuable skills. And a lot of times the way that we do that is through specific projects. So we allow our youth the opportunity to self-select projects from a list of over 300. And a lot of those have to do with animals of some kind or agriculture of some kind. So a lot of listeners might be familiar with, if you go to the county fair and you see the animals that are being paraded around by young kids, that's part of the 4-H program. So they learn about the value of being responsible for the care and responsible care of their livestock species all the way through their livestock's life, and then to sale and market as well.
Very full and well-rounded program.
Yes, very much. And I always say it's more than just cows and chickens, but that's often what we think of with 4-H. So we cover all types of animals in 4-H, actually small and large and equine. So rabbits, chickens, cavies, which are guinea pigs, if you don't know, all the way to sheep, goats, llama, alpaca, beef cattle, dairy cattle, and then our horse project as well.
Wonderful. I think one thing that excites me in having you on the podcast is I certainly have, I would say, above average understanding of animals as a whole, but my background is really focused on wildlife. That's what I studied in college. And with the Echo, we're really trying to kind of set the scene for animals across the board. And I know that I don't have like the biggest understanding of animal science in that world. I have a little bit, but it's so interesting to hear you talk about all of this. So I know that you teach animal science, and just like you did with 4-H, I'm hoping you can kind of paint a little picture for what is animal science and what do you cover when you teach things like that?
Sure. Well, at our college, we focus primarily on large livestock. So we're looking at cattle, both beef and dairy, sheep, goats, pigs, chickens. So I said large, but we do include chickens in there. And my role is primarily to teach our students the responsible care and management of livestock species. So a lot of our students come to us because they're either currently in agriculture or have an interest in agriculture or animals of some kind. And that could range from having their own herd of animals to becoming a veterinarian, which is what many of my students are interested in. So we help to provide that foundational knowledge everywhere from the anatomy and physiology of animals and how their body systems work, all the way to proper feed and nutrition for those different species at different points in their lifetime. And then the marketing of any type of animal product, from meat to milk to fiber. So it's really all inclusive. We start with obviously the very basics and then run all the way through the gamut of livestock production.
So what would you say is sort of like the value of animal sciences and agriculture on human culture?
So I think agriculture is invaluable, obviously, and notably I'm biased, right? I'm in that industry,
Right.
but it's what feeds and clothes us every day. And so animal agriculture is a part of that. So I think the value is easy to see. And that's fun for me as an instructor, and in the role that I play is I get to empower students to lead a really good life within an industry that's really valuable and I think really noteworthy. You get a lot of feel good from being in the agriculture industry because you have an impact on people's lives every single day. So that's fun for me, I think, in seeing that value, because it's hard to overlook the fact that we're helping people every day.
I definitely resonate with that feel good energy. One thing while going to college at CSU, we heard all the time in the wildlife program was you get paid in a lot of different ways. Often wildlife jobs don't have these huge budgets, but you get to work outside, you get to work with protecting wild lands and wild animals. And so I definitely appreciate that there is something bigger than just the actual work that you're doing on a day to day.
Yes. I once heard the phrase, it was when I was a 4-H agent actually, but I heard the phrase, we're in it for the outcome, not the income. And that resonated with me. It applies to many aspects of my life, but I think agriculture is certainly one of them, and livestock agriculture, and then teaching as well. We get value from different things and in different ways. And a lot of times that's not monetary. And that's okay sometimes because we have a lot of that really, really wonderful outcome value in what we do.
Yeah, definitely. I like that. We're in it for the outcome, not for the income. It's a great saying. One thing that I was hoping to talk to you about is, again, coming from a place where I don't have a super deep understanding of animal sciences, what conflicts are being faced in animal sciences right now?
I think many people don't have a background in that. And that actually plays into some of the issues that we see. I think, unfortunately, one of the issues that I face most as an instructor, and then also just being a part of our larger agriculture industry, is we have sort of a disconnect between our consumers and our producers. And that's no one's fault. We can't point fingers in any specific direction. But that's something that I like to teach about and talk about in my classes, bridging that gap between producers and consumers. Why do we raise livestock? How do we raise livestock? Why do we do it that way? And why is that important? Why is it safe? Why is it ethical? But being sure that we're really communicating out to our consumers the why behind what we do. Because unfortunately, we've come to this place in our industry where there's a lot of mistrust, and that's okay. People want to know where their food comes from, and I think that's wonderful. But as an industry, we have to provide that information as well. So I think when you talk about issues facing livestock agriculture and just agriculture in general, that's what we see is this disconnect between consumers and producers. And I want to be part of that solution. I want to help bridge that gap, and I want to make sure that the students that I'm teaching are a part of that solution as well.
Yeah, it kind of comes back to education, kind of on both parties. So on consumers, not just going to the store and picking up ground beef and thinking like, oh, this is just ground beef, but knowing that, well, it had to come from somewhere, and trying to support places that are more ethical or more sustainable. But then also, like you're saying, on the other side of things, trying to do better education to bring that information so that it's more publicly available. One thing I think you might be able to provide really good insight in is we're trying to get the listeners skills or education that they can use in their everyday life. And I think it might be interesting to hear your thoughts on what's something that like an everyday person who might not have that agricultural background can do to kind of learn maybe what's more locally available with where to get meat and stuff like that.
I think ultimately, do your research, which sounds really broad. And so I'm going to narrow that down, certainly. But do your research and ask the questions. Don't be afraid to ask those questions, because I think ultimately we're coming to a place where producers want to share that information, and we have to support local, we have to support niche markets, we have to support commercial production, because all of it matters and all of it's important. And so when consumers are doing their research and doing their shopping, there's several resources available. Colorado Beef Council has an excellent link that you can go to where you can find local beef producers and contact them directly to purchase local beef. And it's by county in Colorado. So if you're in Colorado and a Colorado consumer, you can actually go and find local beef. And you might even be able to go out to the ranch where it was raised, which I think is really, really neat. And so several of our larger entities like Colorado Beef Council or Colorado Corn Producers are starting to provide more of that database for consumers to find what they want and what they're looking for. And I think it's exciting that we're starting to provide that information.
Yeah, definitely. And what was that website that listeners can go to again?
It's part of the Colorado Beef Council website. If you want to go to the National Beef Council, there's a national database as well, which is just beef it's what's for dinner. So if you're looking for local beef, you can find it there.
Gotcha. That's one thing where I've done a little bit of research, and it is fascinating. Like you were saying, it's broken down by like counties. And so a lot of that's, I think, closer than people realize, especially in Colorado, where there seems to be a pretty good activity of producers, like you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. When I talk to consumers, that's something that I like to tout as well, is we have so many local producers. Colorado is such an agricultural powerhouse because we have such a wonderful, diverse climate that allows for us to raise many types of products. So everything from beef to cantaloupe and peaches. So if you want something local, Colorado's the place to be because we produce almost all of it.
Definitely. Kind of on the topic of education, do you know of any general misconceptions in the animal science world that you want to like break down that you see all the time, whether it's in the media or just rumors that have been spread around? Are there any misconceptions?
Oh, you don't probably want to get me too started into that, Matthew. There's probably several I can talk about, but I'll talk about a few. And again, just doing your research and making sure that we're having open lines of communication, because it's not necessarily, I don't think, a lack of understanding. It's maybe a lack of information that we're not doing a great job of communicating that. But one that always comes to my mind is, a lot of people seek labeling, right? So one of my favorites as it relates to animal agriculture and the food that we eat is these labels that are, antibiotic free or hormone free. And those have value, certainly, right? So antibiotic free, what does that mean? And that just means that animal was never treated with antibiotics while it was alive. There's good and bad to that, right? We want to be sure that antibiotics never enter the food system, certainly. But livestock agriculture is pretty highly regulated. And so we guarantee that it doesn't. Our meat is actually tested to absolutely ensure that there's never, ever, ever any antibiotics in any meat that you eat, regardless of whether that animal was given antibiotics while it was alive. And I like to think of it as this. If we're sick as humans, what do? Hopefully, we go to the doctor to get better, right? And sometimes that means we take medicine. And so certainly I have a bias in this, but if animals are sick, I find that it's valuable to treat those animals to help them to get better quicker. And so for me personally, right, I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone except for me, I find value in using antibiotics because I want my animals to be better and quicker. But I'm definitely not going to send those animals to be processed and risk having any of those antibiotics get into the food system. I have to be really, really strict with the standards on when I'm giving antibiotics and then how long I have to wait for that meat to enter the food chain. So I think that's one of the misconceptions, that people unfortunately believe that, your meat is stricken with antibiotics, and that's just certainly not the case. And we can guarantee that because we have such well-written restrictions that we have to abide by. There's always bad apples in any industry. Do we have problems in livestock agriculture? Certainly we do. But ultimately, I think what I like people to understand is we care about our animals. The reason that we're raising livestock and animals is because ultimately, yes, we want to make money. We want to be profitable with those products, but we're not profitable if our animals aren't healthy and happy. And so we're doing everything in our power to provide responsible care and management to those livestock. And that's 99.999% of producers are doing that because they can't make money if their animals aren't happy and healthy. So that's what I like to communicate to the public. We have the same goals. We want our animals to be happy and healthy and well cared for. And we spend a lot of money to do that. And so we're ensuring that's happening. There are bad things that happen, but ultimately all of our producers are really, really wonderful people that care very, very deeply about what they do and the animals that they care for.
Yeah, I think on the producer side of things, they care about their livestock because not only is it, a source of income for them, but they're also getting to see the daily life that animal's having. And so like you're saying, I feel like ethical treatment would be, well, if your animal's sick, if you're able to do something and take care of that animal, like helping out with antibiotics, but then also making sure, like you're saying, that you're following protocols and things and not just immediately pumping it full of antibiotics and then like shipping it off. One thing that I'm curious because we were talking about like different labels like antibiotic free and things that people can do in their everyday life that might support kind of their end goals. I know one of the first steps I took was with buying eggs at the grocery store, not just trying to buy the cheapest eggs, even though in college that was very enticing to do, but trying to understand some of the labels that they do. Can you do a breakdown about what some of those labels mean? And then if there's one that you think is a very good ethical choice that people should support?
Yeah, certainly. And I know enough to be dangerous, obviously. So, cage free is actually the standard. We're moving toward pretty much all cage free production by, I believe the year is 2023, but by new regulation, we're moving toward that type of production. That doesn't necessarily mean the same as, let's say, pasture raised, because you use that as an example. So that doesn't mean that these birds are roaming the green fields on the meadow side, but it means that these birds have ample space to move in an indoor facility. So they obviously can have housing that's enclosed a little bit, right? And they like that in many respects. But then they have access to housing that is more open and free for them to move around. Now, even in a cage system, a bird has to have ample space to stand, spread her wings, and move. So the regulations ensure that, certainly, but that's what a cage-free system is giving more space, open space for the birds to move. A lot of times with poultry, that's still taking place in an indoor housing system. And again, just another piece of education for consumers. That's actually really good for our birds because Colorado is a natural migration zone, right? So we have migratory birds that fly over our state. We have those patterns that are happening right here in Colorado. So when we talk about poultry production specific to our state, a lot of times we're housing our poultry indoors because we don't want them to get sick from the birds that are flying over them and providing droppings. So we provide indoor housing systems, but a lot of times, and this is really cool, they have like 2 levels to their house. So the upper level is for them to roost and lay eggs and do all sorts of things. And then the lower level is for them to roam, right? So that would be more of that cage-free system. And what's funny about the birds is they're very much flock animals. So they like to stay together. So a lot of times they'll still be up resting and roosting all together, even though they still have access to that open area to roam around and scratch and peck. We don't see as much with the pasture raised, right? Or free range is another term that we use, free range birds here in Colorado, mostly because of that. And so it's not to say that the eggs that you're buying at the store aren't nutritionally exactly the same, that the birds aren't well cared for. It's actually probably that they're better cared for because we're preventing disease outbreak in those birds.
Little bit on both sides there. Yeah. So it's not quite completely letting them just be in a field. It's giving them that space while also trying to be on like the regulated side and making sure that everything's safe and protected. I love the idea that there are chickens out there who have like a little like duplex that they're in and like having guests over and hanging out in the duplexes.
Yes, that's exactly how I picture it too. It's the second level of their home. They have 2-level homes.
Which in Denver, those chickens have it pretty good because pricing in Colorado's definitely gone up in the past couple of years. Have you seen shows like Westworld or Yellowstone as the big one that's ongoing? I ask because I feel like there's this resurgence of cowboy culture. Maybe it's just because I live in Colorado, but I'm seeing more like cowboy hats, or I see billboards all the time for like ranch water and like rodeo style beers and things. So I feel like there's this cowboy culture resurgence. And with shows like Yellowstone, is there something that you think they do well with representing agricultural animals?
Yes. One thing that, at least within what I've seen of Yellowstone, that I think comes through is sort of the emotion involved with the care of animals, right? And I think that that's something that show actually did really well to show that even in tough times, like the first episode of Yellowstone, when unfortunately he has to put the horse down. I hope I'm not spoiling it for anyone.
No, if anything, that'll be a good entice for the show.
Yeah, exactly. So he has to put his horse down because it's severely injured. And in that moment, I'm a producer, but I feel like anyone can feel this, right? You could feel the emotion behind that. And I don't think that's unique to that show, but to me, that's literally the heart of our producers. You could feel that emotion. And so I felt like the show did that well, not just with the horses, but with the cattle, with the bison, right? The care and emotion behind that, because even though we raise some of these products for food, and that's sometimes hard to wrap your head around, the care we have is not diminished by that. Certainly, we really, really care for these animals. They're a part of our family. And so I think that a lot of those shows are doing that really well. And selfishly, making that popular is bringing more people into our industry. And if not for careers, making them interested and ask questions about our industry. Back to what I said before, bridging that gap between consumers and producers. A lot of this popular culture is giving us the opportunity to do that.
Hopefully it inspires a whole new generation of people to support cattle farms and go see the horses when they're on show and things like that. Or even just visiting a rodeo. I know I went when it was in town, and it's amazing to see some of the things that these animals are capable of doing. We saw draft horses where they're pulling all of this weight behind them, and that has practical use on farms, but just the athleticism that some of these animals have is very, very impressive.
It's astounding. So I'm glad that you did that, because that's my hope, is that everyone starts to make a connection, because it impacts us. And I think it's amazing. Obviously, biased opinion, but I think ag is awesome.
A little bit of bias coming through. Another thing that I'm hoping you might be able to provide insight. I certainly saw a lot of this coming from the wildlife background. We had a movement to reintroduce wolves into Colorado. And then it was kind of funny because right before that vote was supposed to be taken, wolves actually naturally came down from Wyoming into Colorado. And a concern that producers were having was the predation aspect of wolves taking livestock. But I'm curious, from your perspective of things, how did the community respond to wolves, or how are they responding to wolves? Because since that vote, it passed, so wolf reintroduction is starting.
I think your background plays to this too, Matthew, and we talk about it in all of agriculture and natural resources, but ecosystem management, right? And so people who were opposed to wolf reintroduction, producers included, part of their premise of that was, well, are we upsetting an ecosystem that's already here, right? So wolves have moved out. Now we have a new ecosystem in place. Are we upsetting that ecosystem by bringing wolves back in? Not in a natural way. And fortunately, that started to happen, as you said, in a natural way. And then the other piece of that for our ag producers certainly was, because it's not a natural way of reintroduction, will there be significant predation on our range animals? And especially up in the mountains where we're grazing our livestock on mountain ranges, sometimes on BLM land. Is that going to really, significantly impact predation in those areas? I think we've seen some of that, probably not significant impacts of that. I teach economics as well. So, the law of unintended consequences, those are just things we have to think about. If there is significant predation, part of that law states that producers will be compensated for the losses in those livestock. And certainly compensation is appreciated, and that's one thing. Obviously, it has to be paid for by someone. But the other piece that I'll go back to is the emotional aspect of that for producers. If your animals are being killed by wolves on a regular basis, that's certainly financial hardship, but it's an emotional hardship too, because we care about our animals. And so having to try to understand and deal with that and take measures to prevent that, I think that was all on their mind. Because of the natural reintroduction, I don't think that we've seen real significant negative impacts from that thus far, but I haven't looked pretty detailed into that either.
No, and I don't think we've really started, as far as I understand, even doing reintroduction efforts because of the natural stuff that was happening. I think they're waiting to see a little bit, and we're at the start end of all of that. But thanks for providing kind of some insight into the producer world. I know that there are systems in place, because it's not like the goal was just reintroduce a predator and be like, well, good luck, everyone. That there are efforts to, if predation happens, to compensate producers. But like you're saying, it's also, there's an emotional factor. There's a stress that's coming from having to worry about oh, well, geez, is this now something I'm going to have to worry about? So Towards the tail end of the podcast, I want to know if there's anything that listeners can do to either support you or support the work that you do with animal sciences, or just stay involved and up to date. So I'll kind of pass things over to you. What's the best way to support you?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. And thank you to all the listeners, because you do support agriculture, whether you realize it or not. And if you eat meat or wear clothes or do any of that, you're supporting animal agriculture. And so you're already doing that. You're already supporting our industry. So we appreciate that. We appreciate our consumers. I always say consumers drive our bus and we're just along for the ride. And so by purchasing agricultural products, you're doing that. And that looks different for everyone, right? So if you don't eat meat, great. You're still hopefully wearing clothes, right? Hopefully we're all wearing clothes, and that supports agriculture and our food and fiber system. If you use a cell phone, some of the livestock byproducts go into cell phone wiring. So by purchasing our products, you're actually supporting our industry, and we appreciate that. But if you want to go one step further, I would encourage you just to be comfortable having conversations with your producers, approaching animal agriculture, farmers and ranchers and whomever that might be, to learn more about where your food comes from. That's exciting to me. And so many people are interested in where their food comes from and want to understand that process, because that just gives us an opportunity to showcase what we do. So be willing to have those conversations, even if they're uncomfortable sometimes, and just continue purchasing our products. Continue eating and clothing yourselves.
Yes, always remain clothed. Another thing that I was hoping to have you do is talk a little bit about why you should support animal education and the value in that.
The primary reason to support animal education of all kinds is because it impacts your lives every single day. And my industry, specifically in livestock agriculture, provides you with food, clothing, medical necessities, and byproducts that you use every single day. And so by providing education about what we do and why we do it, it's having an impact on everyone.
Excellent. It was a great pleasure to have this conversation and expand my knowledge. I never want to say that I feel like I know enough or anything like that, but it's great to always expand what I know, and you're such an amazing resource. So thanks for being available today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Wow, that was a great conversation with Amy. Given my background, I'm very informed when it comes to wildlife, especially with mammals. But with agriculture, I have a lot to learn. Amy is such a great communicator and teacher, and she really inspired me to learn more about animal science and agriculture. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. It's time to reveal the answer to
What's that animal?
One more time, here's the sound. Have your guess? Well, this may not be too surprising, but the sound is a chicken. What is more intriguing about this squawk is it's the sound they make while laying eggs. Tune into the next episode for another chance to play
What's that animal?
If you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe and consider supporting us directly at patreon.com/onewildpodcast. Here, you'll find exclusive content, like the full video versions of our conversations. To find out more about the other work we do, visit our website at onewildpodcast.com. Follow us on Instagram at @theechoanimals, and follow our TikTok at creature.feature. On behalf of all animals, thank you for listening.